In June 2016, news came from London that shook the EU. The British wanted to leave the Union. And today? Well, whichever way you look at it, Brexit has not been a success story so far. 7 years after the Brexit referendum, 3/4 of Brits have lost confidence in their politicians even. That's according to a poll for the London think tank UK in a Changing Europe that was released on the anniversary of the referendum. And 75% of respondents said, I have lost confidence in British politicians in recent years. And 74% believe that politicians act more in their own interest than in the interests of the general public. In the referendum on June 23rd in 2016, the British voted 52 to 48% to leave the European Union. This was completed on January 31st in 2020. As the survey shows, a majority of 52% now believe that Brexit was not a success. Only 1 in 10 sees it differently. Nevertheless, there can be no question of regret, a neologism of Brexit and regret. Of those who voted for Brexit, only 15% regret it. Almost half of those surveyed, with 48%, would vote for a return to the EU in a referendum today, and only a third, with 32%, would be in favor of staying out. A majority of people in Great Britain, though, with 54%, simply don't want to hear anything more about Brexit. Yeah, but that would be the ostrich tactics. Only 18% of people who voted for Britain to leave the European Union in 2016 believe Brexit was a success. And this is shown by this survey. And 61% are convinced that it will still turn out well in the end. And I don't know where they take that from. 7 years after the referendum campaign, the Public Opinion Research Institute Public First asked more than 4,000 people willing to leave the EU how they think about Brexit today. And less than a fifth of them, with these 18%, said it went well or very well. 30% of the opinion that it went neither well nor badly, and for 26% it's still too early to make a judgment. But with inflation at an all-time high in the country and a gross domestic product flat, economists have increasingly warned of the lingering impact of Brexit on trade and investment. However, less than a third of Leave voters polled, with 29%, believe Brexit has had a negative economic impact. I don't know where they've been this 7 years. Of those who think Brexit hasn't gone well, many blame politics. And former leader of the UK Independence Party, Nigel Farage, shares this view. He recently claimed that Brexit had failed. In this group of respondents, 70% said Brexit would have gone well, and almost half believe politicians could have done it but didn't even try. What fools. The implementation of the decision to leave the EU has repeatedly divided the Conservative Party over the past 7 years. The tussle over the UK's relation with the EU led to the resignation of Theresa May and helped Boris Johnson win an 80-seat majority in 2019 by promising to get Brexit done. The director of think tank UK in a Changing Europe, Anand Menon, told The Guardian that disappointment with the way Brexit has been handled is likely to fuel mistrust in politicians. Many exit voters believe that Brexit was not a success because politicians failed them. The danger is that this will lead to an erosion of trust in politics and politicians, he said. Despite the dissatisfaction of many exiters with the way Brexit has been handled, there is little evidence in the poll of a widespread change of heart, perhaps explaining the reluctance of Labour and Liberal Democrats to move towards Brexit in the election campaign focus. In the latest regular YouGov poll conducted last month, 56% of respondents said Britain's exit from the EU was wrong, versus 31% who said it was right. And 62% said Brexit was more of a failure, while only 9% saw it as more of a success. And in a survey by opinion research institute Opinion, in which 4 options for future relations were offered, 36% of British respondents opted for rejoining the European Union. 25% would very much like to see a closer relationship negotiated with the EU than the current one. But politics is lagging behind the public. Great Britain's Prime Minister Rishi Sunak sees the pragmatic reasons for better economic relations with Europe which is still the UK's largest single market. But he is and remains a true Brexit supporter, even more extreme than his disgraced predecessor Boris Johnson ever was. Sunak's world is Silicon Valley on one end and dynamic Asia on the other. He's even reluctant to foot the bill for Britain's rejoining to the Horizon Scientific Cooperation Programme, despite almost unanimous support from the scientists from both sides of the Channel. Given the continued strength of pro-Brexit supporters in Sunak's party and the intimidating power of the Eurosceptic press, only small incremental improvements can be expected under his leadership. And meanwhile, opposition leader Keir Starmer is relentlessly focused on winning next year's general election. He believes that can only be done by winning back those voters who were enthusiastic about Brexit and who therefore switched to Boris Johnson's Conservatives in the 2019 election with the slogan "Get Brexit Done." You all remember the red wall. Starmer is advised by pollster Deborah Mattinson. In her book Beyond the Red Wall, she describes how one of those swing voters told her the moment he heard the results of the 2016 Brexit referendum. He therefore felt as if England had won the World Cup. And Labour leader Keir Starmer recently published an op-ed in the right-wing, heavily Eurosceptic Daily Express, in which he flatly claimed that Britain's future lies outside the EU, not in the internal market, not in the customs union, not with a return to freedom of movement. These arguments are where they belong, in the past, and he said, the Tories' paper-thin deal has stifled Britain's potential and weighed heavily on trading terms with the EU. With every day that we don't build on this, our European friends and competitors not only eat our lunch, they steal our dinner money too. On closer inspection, this article was indeed arguing for a new deal with the EU, but it was also playing the old New Labour game of placating the Eurosceptic tabloids. If Labour wins the next election with or without parliamentary support from the Liberal Democrats or the Scottish National Party, the new government will no doubt seek a better deal with the EU. Yeah, but the Tories tried that. It's not unlikely that by the 10th anniversary of the June 2016 referendum, a 2025 cross-channel review of the EU-UK Trade and Cooperation Agreement could have opened the door to closer economic ties, but not the way he's selling them. But this could include significant elements on participation in the internal markets and customs union, with corresponding legislative approximation. But it's hard to see how Labour can remotely hope to meet this hugely ambitious goal of securing the highest sustainable growth among the G7 countries without post-contracting frictions with the country's largest market after Brexit. And still the underlying dynamic of divergence between those remain there. With every month that passes, the UK and the EU are increasingly drifting apart. Once strong cultural, commercial, artistic, scientific and political ties are weakening. And a British University Vice-Chancellor recently told a journalist that the number of his EU students has fallen by 90%. The UK has more immigrants overall than before the Brexit vote, but fewer from the EU. In northern European countries, which the British once regarded, or they regarded the British as special partners and friends within the European Union, Britain is rarely mentioned today, except perhaps as an object of pity, ridicule and scorn. The sordid farce surrounding Boris Johnson's resignation and ignominious exit from the House of Commons has only reinforced these feelings. And these countries have formed new partnerships, as do people after a breakup. They have evolved. And the same is true for the EU itself. In response to the COVID crisis, and more particular to the war in Ukraine, Europe's core political community is experiencing a period of rather dynamic integration in areas of vital interest to Britain. Security policy and arms procurement, digital policy and the regulation of AI, large-scale support for industry to switch to green technologies that compete with Biden's fiscal policies in the US and, of course, the Chinese industrial policies on the other. Even when the sails of His Majesty's ship Global Britain flutter in the middle of the English Channel, Great Britain does not stand still, because both the Conservative government and the Labour opposition want to develop their own variants of these policies, which will differ and compete with those of the EU. And so much about Starmer's claims. In several key areas such as technology, artificial intelligence, cultural and creative industries, and financial services, the UK does still have strengths that make it a contender, but the access to the EU market is a different topic. And a new UK government will need to adopt a bold strategy, and both sides will need to show goodwill to counter deep and deeper divergences. And Starmer is promising things I don't see coming, because he is definitely also, like the Tories, thinking about the services sector. And the services sector was, from the EU side, excluded from the TCA in many parts for very good reasons, especially because of the not strong alignment in trade after Brexit. Services is where Britain needs access to the EU, but the EU doesn't need that. And a lot of things like clearance, I talked about this in tons of video with the Euro clearance, they are happy when it's back in the EU. And it will be back in the EU at some point. They need some time for preparing. They didn't do all their homework either, and they extended some transition periods. But in the end, the biggest part of it will end in the EU. And why should any politician from any EU member state, have the interest to give the British, with the current situation in trade, give the British anything else in services to compete within their own single market, which they are protecting? Rightly so, by the way. And I read the comments when I said the last time that Starmer is lying to the people now as the Tories did before. And I still believe that. And some said, well, he's telling them this now because of the election, and after that he will reveal the truth. Well, how do you want him to do that? If he's telling them one thing before the election and then the other thing after the election, that will be a very short government, a maximum of 4 years for a Labour government, and then we have the Tories back. Labour wants to win this election, but they have to start telling the people the truth. The damages of Brexit can only be further reduced by closer alignment to the EU. If they don't want the closer alignment, there will be no damage reduction. And if he says there's no returning to the single market, to the customs union in whatever way, then he will not change anything. The EU will not open the whole TCA again after the review and give the British all they want. We had that. They have negotiated for years on the TCA, which came then last minute before Brexit, because that what Starmer is promising now and telling what he wants now is what the Tories didn't get in years of negotiations. And as much as I'm hitting on the Tories for all the lies they were telling, I won't get Starmer through with the same tactics. A lot of people that are always insulting me and whatever didn't get from that for the years I'm doing this channel. I'm basing what I'm doing here on facts as much as I can, as much as I humanly can. But the same applies to Labour. And you will see that if this continues. I hit the Tories, although I'm a conservative myself here in Germany, for all the lies they tell. And I will do the same with Labour. Don't think anything else. And at the moment, I am expecting a lot of more lies to come from Labour the closer this election comes. But to my loyal viewers, especially that accompanied me over the years, you will hear my thoughts on this. You can count on that, as you did all the time. But you hear my thoughts on many things, on other topics as well. And I always say, don't stay in your little bubble. Have a look what's happening in the world. That's why I have a lot of other channels I'm not making money with, but I think it's important to bring you this information. But that's why I want to remind you today that in every video, there's a video description. And in this video description, there is a list of all my channels. And do yourself a favor and take a look outside your bubble if you're usually only looking at reports on the UK or Brexit or whatever, or just on England. I don't know. Have a look outside. There's a lot going on outside there, and do yourself a favor and get yourself informed. And if you have any questions that you want to ask because it's not been answered enough from your point of view in one of my videos, you'll soon have the chance when there will be a post on my community tab regarding the start of the live streams or the restart of my live streams. My channel members and my patrons already had the chance to ask questions for that first live stream. They will be picked, definitely. That's their privilege for being channel members and patrons. And you all get the chance when the post comes up to put your questions there, and I will pick questions from that for the live stream as well. Not all of the questions that will be put there can be in the live stream just for a duration, because I already have some from members and patrons, but I will pick some and definitely answer them there as well. I did that from time to time in my live streams when I did them regularly, and for a long time I wanted to restart them, but then the Russian hackers came and so on. You all know the story. But soon, as I said, there will be the post, so keep an eye out for the post, and then you can ask your questions. And for right now, the next video is right here in the end screen. I'll see you there. I'll be back.